Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Mrs. Lee, Honorable Ministers, Singapore and Malaysia, Excellencies, Professor Eustin Hua, President of the Economic Society of Singapore. Thank you very much for, that was probably the most comprehensive biodata. The only thing he didn't mention was my age. And I'm glad he didn't. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed a great pleasure to be with you this evening. And I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak here. I would like to talk about the state of Malaysia-Singapore bilateral relations, the Malaysian economy and its direction, and also ASEAN. This year, that Malaysia holds the chairmanship. The title of my speech tonight is Malaysia-Singapore, the ties that bind. And we all know that these ties run very deep and go back a long way. We are not just neighbors. Throughout the shared history of Malaysia and Singapore, relations of the last 5 decades, it is clear that our two nations are intertwined, inextricably linked in so many ways, and enjoy very strong people-to-people connectivity. Indeed, Singapore's Senior Minister, Mr. GoH yesterday reminisced with me over lunch about the time he spent in Terminal Pahang when he was a child, as his parents had moved there from Singapore during the Japanese occupation when he was 4 years old. Countless Singaporeans and Malaysians have stories to tell about living in or visiting each other's countries. In fact, our host for this evening hails from Penang. In fact, many Singaporeans have family members and close relatives, and vice versa. That closeness was underlined soon after I became Prime Minister. On our visit, our first official visit to Singapore, to the Singapore Botanic Gardens in May 2009, I was honored to be told that a hybrid of the Dendrobium Ronald Emmanuel and Dendrobium jeffreyi orchids had been renamed the Dendrobium Najib Rosmah. In fact, Prime Minister Lee and Ho Chin gave us another plant last night. And if you will allow me to stretch that analogy, I would say that hybrid orchid is an apt symbol of the relationship between Malaysia and Singapore. It needs to be nurtured and looked after carefully and lovingly. Only then it will blossom and flourish beautifully like the plant that was given to us last night. Nevertheless, as close neighbors, we do have challenges, like having to manage our differences. We have a Malay proverb for it. Sedangkan lidah lagi tergigit, which means we are like tongue and teeth. In other words, we are close. We need to work together. to find positive solutions to our differences if they should arise. For example, our resolution of the points of agreement in 2010, after a 20-year deadlock, is a good case in point. It was an example of how we chose to move forward in a spirit of friendship and mutual benefit and put a long-standing stumbling block behind us. So I'm delighted that relations between Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and I, and therefore between our two governments, are now so warm. Indeed, I think it would be no exaggeration to say they have never been better in our country's histories. I see Mr. Sam Gui applauding. This closeness and agreement that follow are of tangible economic and security benefit to all Malaysians and Singaporeans. This should be and must be the priority of national leaders, i.e. the people's interests above all else. Recently, we have had fruitful discussions on a number of issues, including on iconic projects, such as the planned high-speed rail linking Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. And we discussed this morning. And this project has aroused much global interest. And we can see this as a real game changer. And I quipped during the press conference, should we decide to divide the implementation of this high-speed rail, Singapore does their part, Malaysia does our part, hopefully the two lines will meet at the same point. Then we will have our high-speed rail. Ladies and gentlemen, these ties are being further strengthened through the regular exchange of visits at the highest level. His Majesty the King attended the state funeral of the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew recently. I was also here to pay my final respects and to convey personally my condolences to Prime Minister Lee for the loss of a man who was not just an international statesman and a titanic figure in Singapore, but also his father. Such bonds of friendship between our two countries should be the norm and the future. As it is, we are linked in so many ways. The economies of Malaysia and Singapore, for instance, have always had a high degree of interdependence. Bilateral trade between Malaysia and Singapore remains strong at 209 billion last year, and the trend is very encouraging. We are both each other's second largest trading partner after China, and Singapore remains one of the top investors in Malaysia, with a total value of approved projects last year standing at 8.3 billion ringgit. FDI stock from Singapore alone amounted to 80.7 billion ringgit in 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, 3 years ago, Prime Minister Lee and I agreed that a joint ministerial committee between our two countries should explore more ways to enhance collaboration in Iskandar, Malaysia for our mutual benefit. An industrial cooperation work group was set up to promote, coordinate the development of industrial and services activities between Iskandar, Malaysia and Singapore, based on existing economic clusters in new growth, areas such as advanced materials engineering, electronics, food processing, and the creative industry. And I believe we have already seen the fruits of this cooperation. It is a win-win situation for both of us on either side of the Straits of Johor. I'm pleased to note that while Iskandar, Malaysia and Penang have been drawing the bulk of investment from Singapore, Singaporeans are now also beginning to invest in other economic corridors in Malaysia, including Sabah and Sarawak. We welcome this as it supports Malaysia's move up the value chain and spurs innovation, both of which are crucial in sustaining our economic momentum. I'm also pleased to note that existing Singapore or Singaporean investors have continued to demonstrate a strong level of confidence in Malaysia by expanding and diversifying their projects. Investment relations have been further strengthened through enhanced collaboration between our two major government-linked companies, Malaysia's Khazanah Nasional and Singapore's Temasek Holdings, referring to the CEO of Temasek. These CLCs and several other private companies are involved in the development of many high-value projects in Malaysia and Singapore, including the proposed wellness center in Iskandar, Malaysia. Turning to the tourism sector, the total number of visitors to Malaysia and Singapore in 2014 was 13.9 million, an increase of 5.7% from 2013. But we want even more of you to visit, and this year Tourism Malaysia is hoping we can attract 14.5 million guests from Singapore. All of this shows how much we gain by working together. And it is in this spirit that I say that I'm sure that we will soon be able to resolve other bilateral issues, especially those affecting investment and the movement of people between our two nations. Ladies and gentlemen, I am firmly committed to Malaysia reaching high income status by 2020. Budget 2015 introduced many new tax incentives for principal hubs and projects that invest in innovation, technology and create high income jobs. Among those that will be of particular interest to Singapore-based companies are the incentive for the establishment of principal hub. I'm using the word incentive, Prof. This new tax incentive, which is intended to tap into the increasing trend for global offshoring, encouraging foreign companies to take advantage of Malaysia's competitive position in ASEAN and Asia Pacific. And the second is the capital allowance to increase automation in labor-intensive industries. This regulation will provide a 200% capital allowance for the first 2 million to 4 million ringgit of expenditure, depending on the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, the global economy currently faces many challenges, including the decline in oil prices and other major export commodities. Despite this, I'm pleased to say that Malaysia is doing well. Last year, we posted a GDP growth rate of 6%. I'm confident that this year, we can achieve economic growth between 4.5 to 5.5%. In fact, closer to the latter figure. Over the next 4 years, the OECD predicts our country will enjoy annual growth of 5.6%. We have just launched the 2014 annual report on Malaysia's economic transformation program, whose 12 national key result areas make up 68% of our gross national income. Under the economic transformation program, 1.8 million new jobs have been created, and employment has declined to under 3%. The national key result areas have contributed significantly to the diversification of our economy and strengthened its resilience against external shocks. We have also introduced the goods and services tax the nation's biggest ever reform of its tax regime. Not only will this broaden our tax base, strengthen our revenue stream, and further reduce dependency on oil and gas, but we also anticipate that this will lead GDP to increase by 0.3% and exports by 0.5%. Our economic fundamentals continue to remain strong. Ladies and gentlemen, last week it was our pleasure to host the 26th ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur and Langkawi. We made progress on many fronts, including adopting the Kuala Lumpur Declaration on a people-oriented, people-centered ASEAN, the Declaration on institutionalizing the resilience of ASEAN and its communities and peoples to disasters and climate change, and the Langkawi Declaration on the global movement of moderates. I might add here that in both our countries, we are well aware of the need to guard against those who might misguidedly wish to join the so-called Islamic State. The fight against extremism, against violent extremism, belongs not just in the Middle East, but here at home as well. And we welcome Singapore's cooperation in our efforts on this front. At the summit, we discussed all aspects of the work being done to ensure that we establish an ASEAN community by the end of this year. But perhaps most relevant to everyone here tonight are the steps that have been taken to realize the formation of an ASEAN economic community. I'm aware that there are some who are a little skeptical about the AEC being set up on time. Let me reassure you, the ASEAN leaders remain absolutely committed to this. The current implementation rate of AEC initiatives is over 90%, and we will press for that figure to rise. But it's not just about numbers. We must look at the qualitative aspects of economic integration as well. There are still obstacles and barriers to trade and investment in the region, complex regulatory requirements, non-tariff barriers, transparency issues, and predictability of rules and regulations are challenges that we must continue to tackle. ASEAN needs to enhance its resilience as the grouping enters into strategic relationships with major trading nations through free trade or economic partnership agreements. Member states must also refrain from introducing new measures that may be counterproductive and go against the spirit of economic integration. But efforts towards liberalization and integration are already contributing towards ASEAN's overall competitiveness. There have been steady flows of FDIs to the region. Per capita income is about $4,000, and we have a burgeoning middle class and a young and increasingly skilled population. Our record is already enviable. From 2000 to 2013, real GDP growth in ASEAN outstripped America, Britain, France, Germany, and Japan. The ASEAN journey, which commenced in 1967, contributed to a complete transformation of the region. But think of how much more we can do as we become an ever more cohesive community. Ladies and gentlemen, 2015 is a very special year for Singapore as you celebrate the 50th anniversary of your independence. And I hope to be able to join you at this historic and memorable occasion. We congratulate you on that anniversary and wish to take the opportunity to emphasize all that we share and have in common and all the great opportunities for Malaysia and Singapore as we work together. Working together as partners, as good neighbors in the region. I'm delighted to know that Prime Minister Lee now has a clean bill of health. Therefore, I have a friend who is fighting fit, and together we will be able to shape the destinies of our peoples, to make our relationship ever more productive, mutually beneficial, and forward-looking. I know that Prime Minister Lee and I could not be more committed to enhancing the already strong bonds between our two countries for the benefit of all Malaysians and Singaporeans. I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.